Hey watercolor wizards, Harja here. Today I'm sharing another one of my Motherload series videos, teaming with so much information all together in one crazy video that you won't find anywhere else. So please credit and share my video and channel. As usual, art blogs, video notes, sketches, deconstructed painting posts, art gifts, and more rewards are available for my patrons on Patreon. So I typically get straight to painting, and I don't show my sketch process to save time and make the most of our short attention spans. But I have discussed my sketch process in a separate video before, and today I'll be demoing and comparing 5 methods of drawing anything, which will all work whether you are a novice or expert, but of course all things improve with practice. All 5 ways I share are for drawing anything from a reference, whether printed, digital, or real life, but they will help drawing from imagination skills develop too. Method 1 is freehand. This is my favorite drawing method, and it basically just means drawing without tracing. Your hands are free from any other help as you sketch the contour lines of whatever you see. Freehand works best if you loosen your arm up and reduce even a complex subject to just large simplified shapes like squares, triangles, rectangles, and ovals. Then move to smaller shapes. You eyeball distances and estimate where shapes and lines go through constant visual comparison. So here I have a flower from a portion of a historical painting, and I chose it because it's some sort of tulip that's complex enough not to just be a simple circle or heart shape, but simple enough that you can focus on understanding the methods I'm sharing and not on the subject that's being drawn. So first I reduced the bloom to a big circle for most of its girth, making it easy for me to begin to just place a general form on the paper. Then I used just that first circle and the size of it to estimate how and where the next petals will be placed. So I can see the back 3 petals are triangular shapes, and if I was to take the full length of the circle, they're about 1/3 of the length of the circle past the circle, while the first 3 petals are about the same length as that big circle, and so they fit mostly inside of it. And once I have a petal or 2 here, I can also now compare them to each other along with that first big circle and keep adjusting my lines to make my drawing accurate. And then I just keep eyeballing and drawing and erasing and adjusting till I get my drawing to match the reference in all its proportions. And this is the same process for every subject and every medium, from flowers to faces or pencil to gouache or watercolor. Just estimate, sketch, erase, adjust, and repeat. Freehand drawing requires the most practice, but it's worth it. Freehand practice makes all the other drawing methods easier. It also makes estimating and painting shapes easier, which is useful since using a paintbrush nimbly is not a step you can skip in traditional painting. And if you can learn to accurately place contour lines in pencil, you will learn to then accurately place shading and rendering on forms with paint too. Additionally, freehand drawing allows you to make voluntary changes to a reference to make it more graceful or visually pleasing, rather than just be a slave to the reference by copying it exactly. You can do this in other ways of drawing too, but it just makes it a lot easier with freehand. And freehanding will always result in the most natural and graceful pencil lines. So the result I have is a sketch of an accurately proportioned flower, which I'll show later is just as good as any of the other results from the different drawing methods that used more assistive tools. It's just practice to increase comfort and good eye-hand coordination. So the second way to draw is gridding. You basically use a ruler to measure and place equidistant dashes, which you then connect vertically and horizontally to make a grid of squares. You can also make the sections even smaller with diagonal lines through the squares if you want to make triangles, but here I stopped at squares. And I would argue this is a subcategory of freehand, just freehand with training wheels. The grid is helping you balance your lines the way little extra training wheels help you balance a bike. I used this a lot when I was younger to tackle complex subjects fast, and it did eventually increase my comfort in drawing that I used it less and less. Now I haven't used it in many years, except for this video. What stands out to me now is how long it takes to draw the grid on both the reference and the drawing paper, though you can make or buy a clear grid overlay to use over the reference at least, and you also have to erase the grid carefully from behind your drawing once you're done. So keep that in mind when gridding, that it is more time consuming to set up and clean up after. But in some situations, it really is a lifesaver. Like if you used a grid to hang in front of you as you sketch a real life subject or locale and you needed to do it really fast, a grid would really help. This grid hanging in space is actually a tool called an Albertian veil, named after Leon Alberti, who wrote about it as an artist tool making use of math and perspective in the 1400s. And he stressed that it was not a cheating technique, just a mathematical tool like perspective lines to help artists draw accurately. And you can see that since I used larger squares on my drawing, the flower got bigger proportionately. So grids are also useful to redraw a drawing larger or smaller, and they've been long used by mural painters to do just that. A mural painter can do a small mural mock-up, grid it, then grid the wall to be painted, and all the lines will go up accurately. And you can even draw a grid in receding perspective to draw a subject that is in a different perspective accurately in the receding perspective, something that would be daunting and confusing without the grid. Next up is drawing with a proportional divider, which gives artists another mathematical tool to assist in drawing accurately. I paid about $130 for this one that I have here like 7 years ago, and I'm sad to say that I've never even used it, so I should have just bought the much cheaper one for maybe $12 a pop, especially since that way I could have learned at far less cost that I don't ever remember to use a proportional divider. So this is literally the first time that this tool has been out of its box, and that's shameful. Anyway, a proportional divider is like a two-ended compass that you draw circles and angles with in geometry, and in fact you could make do with a one-sided cheap geometry compass that comes with your geometry protractor set if you're in a pinch. Though it won't do some of the more complex stuff a two-ended proportional divider or marine navigational divider will. The way it works for drawing purposes is that you need to set up a horizontal and vertical line reference on both your drawing surface or canvas and your reference. It can be a cross or plus sign drawn through the middle of both of them. It can be an accurate box drawn outside both of them. Here I use both. You just need literally a frame of reference to make measurements. That's precisely where that phrase comes from. And then you just start to make single distance measurements from the reference and transfer those as dots or dashes to the drawing. You can see me do that over and over here. You don't have to measure and map as many dots as I did. Probably half would have sufficed before I could just join in the lines, but I did a lot of extras so you could observe how and where I took useful measurements from the reference and transfer them to the drawing. Once you have your dots plotted, you can sort of play connect the dots and have a measured mathematical gauge of where your subject should be placed in the proper proportions. If you want to increase or decrease the size of the drawing versus a reference, you can also do that with a proportional divider. You just take the reference measurements with one side and the drawing's resulting measurements from the other side of the tool. It applies the equal intersecting angles rules from geometry. I'm not going to show that in this video. Here I just draw the flower at the same size as the reference flower and just use one side of the divider. I can do a future video if there's a demand for all the tricks a proportional divider can perform. I will say that the metal points on this divider were super fine, unlike the points on cheaper plastic dividers, so it's nice that I was able to take some very small measurements. A proportional divider is more challenging than the grid method since it involves more freehand, but it does get easier with practice. I haven't given this particular method any practice at all, which is why both the freehand and gridding drawings are faster and more natural for me than the proportional divider one. But keep in mind, I also stop at the general measured outline here, so you can just see how this method works with this tool. But if I took the time to rework all these lines for a better contour flow and finish up the rest of the sketch freehand, it will be just as good as the fully freehand or gridded version. Any drawing method that you use, even if you're using a tool to assist you, will end up needing some freehand contours to get it to its most graceful. The proportional divider is a useful mathematical artist tool, especially if you don't want to bother with a grid, but also don't want to trace, and just need a bit of gauging size and placement of your subject before you finish drawing it. And the fourth way to draw anything is in a similar spirit of getting some guidance before finishing a drawing freehand. And I'm calling it a guideline trace and draw, or a guided drawing for short. And it consists of a rough, fast trace of the subject using minimal guiding lines only, and then adding the rest of the sketch and details freehand. It's a great method to use once you're confident with your freehand drawing skills, and I've seen lots of accomplished artists and illustrators use it. It is different from full-on tracing, in that you go and finish the sketch and refine it and make the lines graceful using freehand, and trace only minimal lines for placement. Again, as a time saver and not as a crutch. The less lines you trace, the better. Trust me, even as a novice, your flowing freehand line, which pivots on the anchor of your hand, elbow, or shoulder, will always be far more graceful than a hard, disjointed traced line. And you can see I'm finally using a thin, transparent paper for this sketch. As I said in my other sketching tips video, a thin paper will allow you to transfer to watercolor paper easier, and having a sketch separate from your watercolor paper gives a reassuring backup copy. And the reason to have the sketches on transparent paper is that they can be flipped, rotated, and layered with other sketches, and this is like a manual Photoshop. It lets you place and layer drawing pieces for the most pleasing final result. And the fifth and final method is my least favorite, which is why I left it for last, and it's one I don't ever use myself, and that is just tracing something fully. And it can be argued that full-on tracing is not a conventional drawing method at all, because freehand sketching is totally removed, and it's just laying tracing paper over a reference and tracing all the lines you can make out, and then transferring that full tracing to your drawing or painting surface. And full-on tracing will result in the most awkward and stilted lines of any of the methods. The lines will lack subtlety and grace, trace because there are no freehand contour lines, and some of the accuracy of the subject will also be lost because you learn a lot less about the actual shape and form of the subject when you're not taking the time to sketch and refine it and really figure out what it looks like. And I know it's unpopular to say this, but reserve tracing as a last resort. And by last resort, I mean like if you've been abducted by the mafia or terrorists and they want you to paint something complex for their goon den at gunpoint and your freehand skills aren't there yet, or you've lost them from fear. So I urge you to spend your time honing your freehand drawing skills whenever you can. And if you do need a tool to help you draw, try a grid, a proportional divider, or a guided drawing with minimal transferred lines. All of these other ways, unlike full-on tracing, are artist tools that'll help you grow your drafting and freehand skills. You can see here that my first sketch of this flower, which was freehand, when I lay the guideline, trace, and draw over it, my freehand is just as accurate. And I would argue that the full freehand sketch is visibly the most graceful of the 5 sketches in the methods that I used, and that the fully traced sketch is visibly the least graceful of the 5 sketches and the 5 methods that I did. So you can see for yourself. Well, wizards, hope you enjoyed seeing 5 ways to draw anything, demoed and compared all in one crammed video. Thanks for parking your brushes here. Please like, subscribe, and check out my website links and Patreon page to support my art and art channel below. Until next time, wishing you all epic drawing adventures.